access to it from. Just a matter of management.
Sorry. I'm not super prepared for this talk, so it might be a little bit scatterbrained, but it's going to be a kind of mostly technical talk about how we implemented or I guess are still implementing the movement system in Escher. It could also be titled a series of excuses for why the game looks almost exactly the same as it did 2.5 months ago. So the original Game Jam version of this, which some of you played, took like a really basic strategy to trying to make this mechanic work, where the way that the movement actually worked originally was that the top faces of all of the blocks in a level like this would be rasterized essentially down into like a 2D grid. They'd be projected down. And yeah, I think you can even see like, yeah, down here, what that projection looks like for like this level, for example, for those views. And then the player would every frame get projected down into the 2D map, and would do all the collision and movement in 2D, and then get projected back into 3D, which works for the most part for most of the levels in the game. But it really breaks down on certain corner cases. Like, for example, here it looks like you probably shouldn't be able to walk from here up to here, but you can. And another thing is like here, you probably shouldn't be able to walk down there.
Yeah. As long as he doesn't look down, he's dead.
Yeah. It's not like Roadrunner logic there. Because it just sees like, oh, he's on this thing down here. It doesn't see that that's actually like covered up, so it shouldn't be able to walk to it. And also another point of confusion on this is just that the player has to be drawn on top of everything for reasons that you'll see why later. So like here, you should be behind this little collectible thing, but it's not. So what we actually wanted to do was have a more sophisticated system that actually dealt with trying to figure out what platforms look like they should connect to the player and allow the player to walk wherever it actually looks like they should be able to in any given view, which we thought would be really simple because it sounds like a simple concept, but it turns out that's actually really hard to do. Originally, I was trying to fuss around with trying to extend the idea of like projecting things into 2D to like become a whole bunch more complex and deal with like occlusion and the fact that like blocks can be partially occluded by other blocks, and so it have to be like into triangles. And eventually, Drew actually came up with the idea that we should just generate a graph that is a data structure that defines how, what other blocks you can walk to from any given block. And that allows us to solve both the movement problem of knowing where the player can move to, and also the rendering problem. So the player can go behind things, as you can see there.
Awesome.
Like a shadow of the player behind where they are. And they can intersect with things in the world. The graph approach itself doesn't like solve the problem. It's just a way of representing the data. You still have to figure out how to generate the graph, but it's really nice from like a programming standpoint because it defines a really neat interface where like one person can work on the code that actually generates the graph, and the other person can independently be working on the code that actually uses the graph, and you don't have to adapt to, you know, one side to the changes on the other side or anything like that. But it turns out, oh yeah, and we even made like visualizations of the graphs to show what different levels would look like in terms of complexity, which I think are.
Those are gorgeous.
But you can see some levels are really like simple and linear, and then let's get a little bit more complicated.
I can explain these a little more maybe. So the idea with the graph is you have 4 different camera angles, and so any position that you're standing on, any block, there's 4 different states or views that you could be seeing that spot in. So, like, there's always a spot where you start, it's colored in red, and that's like your start state. And you can turn the camera and transition from any other angle to any other angle. And in some angles, everything lines up so that you can actually move to another block, and those are the green lines. So the yellow ones are camera turns, and then the green ones are actually player movement. And the blue dots represent the collectible locations, and there's a yellow one, I think, somewhere down in the corner that represents the final goal location. And so once you generate one of these levels and you actually look at it in this shape, you can actually kind of see, is this an easy level? Is it like really linear? Like you have to get this one, then this one, and this one, and go, or is it like really complex? You can go this way or that way. It's kind of interesting just from a level design perspective, trying to figure out how hard some of these levels really are.
You could run some pretty simple, just graph theory algorithms to generate, like, or not generate, but just to calculate the difficulty.
Well, that's
right.
Flow,
really cool.
Or
flow rates.
even just to see if a level is actually solvable.
Yes.
Right.
Sometimes they're not.
Bit easy. No.
Yeah.
If you're graphing it like that, how difficult would it be to procedurally generate graphs?
I would love, like, I'm trying to get to that point where we can actually start creating like random things. And there's tons of ideas and ways that you can go about actually doing that. But like my first idea is to kind of just do a random walk. So say you have a block, and you can add another block to that, and another block to that, and another one in some random direction. And maybe that's a direct movement, or maybe that's a camera move. And you know, you kind of get this branching idea, and essentially you're creating a maze, but in like 6 dimensions. So,
No big deal.
So it turns out generating the graph is still actually really tricky. There's a lot of weird cases, like had a bug where originally you'd be able to walk from here down to there, and you know, vice versa. You have to figure out that like walking, you know, off this block in this direction is occluded by this block, but not in that direction. Like here, you know, you can walk behind this block on the side, but you can't walk behind it from the other side because you walk on top.
Whoa.
You have to be able to handle the transition, like going out from behind a block and then going back on top of it. And
Whoa.
This game is now properly named.
There's a lot of weird cases. Also, like for example, here, like from this view or this view, kind of looks like you probably shouldn't be able to walk through here because it looks like these blocks are actually connected, but then you can actually walk underneath. And like if you prevented the player from, you know, walking through here, like part of them is still drawn behind the block because you know, that's where they are in 3D space. So we'd like to be able to, ideally, we'd like to be able to come up with like a really consistent universal rule set that handles cases like these, and does the movement and rendering correctly.
It's been kind of challenging just because you think you solve the problem, and then you go through and play something, and then you come across a case like this where you're like, oh, actually that doesn't look quite right, and then you have to go back and think about how you're constructing the graph in the first place. Like what is the rule that specifies whether you can go from one block to the next? Like you have to kind of look at all the blocks around it and see if that looks right.
Yeah, I think we're fairly close to getting something that works. Ideally, in the end, we'd actually really like to be able to ship the like level editor with the game to allow users to create their own levels and their own level sets and stuff. And once we think we've got this more or less figured out, if anybody is like interested in actually trying their hand at like making levels, we can just like get you a copy of the level editor that you can play around with once we've got the movement working to a satisfactory degree.
How would the level editor work?
Well, I can actually show you. It's
okay.
So glad you asked.
we actually have something pretty robust implemented. Like you can place blocks and change the kind of block that it is, and like make selections and
Cool.
make multiple selections and move around and rotate them, and there's all that you can do. Copy, paste, redo, undo, something like that. I actually had a lot of fun like implementing all sorts of features in the level editor, save as, and yeah.
Your game's already more feature complete than like most AAA coming out right now.
Yeah.
No doubt.
And I like this because it's a very calm, relaxing game that engages logic. It's not a smash up game or anything like that.
I like it because it's simple in all the right ways. Like it doesn't do more than it needs to. It just kind of gets in and does what it needs to and gets out. And really the complexity is in the different ways you can reiterate the same concept.
Yeah.
That's what I like about it. That's really where the genius is. So, props.
Yeah. The way that we draw the player is like a little bit funky as well. There's a problem that we ran into originally, which is why we ended up drawing the player on top of everything first, was because we had I'll find a little shows it off, this problem where like the player sort of teleports instantly between two states when they transition across like one of these boundaries. So while they're on the block below, like they're partly included by the block above, and then they immediately pop in.
Yeah.
It's like really weird. And there are like more complex cases with that as well. So to get the rendering working, what we actually do is we draw like a shadow player first, based on where the player is behind everything. So like here you can see with like just the shadow player enabled. And then we draw the player normally on top of that, and then we actually have to go in and draw like a certain number of the blocks into the stencil buffer, and then draw the player with like the depth test disabled based on that. And it looks kind of weird if you like enable only that part of the rendering. Like here you can see they're cut off wherever they're not like above a block. Basically, maybe if this talk had like a third subtitle, it would be like why you should probably not make the same mistake that we did of trying to make a non-Euclidean game. Complicated things. I think that's about all that I had prepared. Just showing off all that.
Man.
If there are
Awesome.
any
Yeah, I'm a little
Wow.
speechless, guys.
Yeah, that's great. That's been popular.
Is this anywhere? Do you guys have like a social media presence for this yet?
We have a Twitter account for the game, and we have a website as well, and I stream development sometimes on Twitch, and that's about all we have. But
What's the Twitter so we can follow everyone?
It's at triple faults.
Triple
Triple faults, plural, like with an S on the end.
faults.
Drop a note in the Discord when you start streaming. I'd love to watch you work on this.
Is yours the green block?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alright.
And I think we'll probably send out like a message on the Discord as well. Once we have the movement all working, so that we can send out the like level editor to people that may be interested in playing around with it.
Definitely. I'd love to see everyone's take on what a good level could be. Like, it's one of the things, like everyone comes up with their own levels. And I think you can get some really diverse design ideas if you just source it out and like give some tools out that see what they can come up with.
Everyone seems to have like a different process of how they intuitively like try to approach making levels.
I'm gonna come up with some case you guys haven't thought of.
I'm sure.
That's my
I
goal.
know, that's the whole playtest thing, is level design.
What's the final look for you guys? I mean, obviously you might not be there yet, but I mean, what's the step where you guys say, okay, now we're ready to monetize or release or do something? Like where are you guys? You know, what does that look like for you guys?
We have a whole like roadmap planned out. We want to try to release the game around like the beginning of September. And there's still a lot of like miscellaneous things that we need to do. Obviously, we need to get the movement stuff figured out. We need to get like a set of levels made. We need to make some like graphical improvements and usability improvements. Like there aren't any menus in the game right now, for example. There probably need to be. And after that, I think it's a lot of just like minor like bug fixes and improvements, and porting to other platforms would be a big difficulty because it's like kind of difficult to port to iOS where we're at right now.
You guys have any kind of budget for marketing this?
I was gonna say you should probably start getting stuff pushed now, build up following, because this is definitely the type of game that people would follow just to see what the next step you guys make is.
And it sounds silly, but like your graphs, like you saw like the whole room light up. Be like, ooh, that's super pretty. Like using those, even if there's just no context in the advertising, for people to be like, well, that's really pretty. What?
If you were able to pull that from one you create that the customer created that they're really proud of, and t-shirts and phone cases, I would totally be a little flex. You know what I'm saying? Like I made that's
nice. Add that to make a feature. Generate one of those graphs in game.
Good.
Like.
I definitely use those as like the load screens for that level too. I know like it goes where you don't really need a load screen, but just add that in so you got that nice little splash of this is the complexity of the level you're about to play.
And then maybe you have like a done, so where you're like, okay, I see what I kind of need to do.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the one that you just finished, then you get to see before you go to the next, so you're not getting a cheat.
I don't know if somebody could read one of those. That'd be pretty impressive. Like, oh, I see exactly how to solve this.
They kind of look like constellations, so if you put it in artwork too, where it's not obvious what it is, could be kind of cool.
Just put it in the background of each level.
I mean, hell, at the end of the at the end of the level, you just have the map of what you did. And you just like doop 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 as it lights up.
See what you follow.
Your trail superimposed on those graphs.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Nice.
Sorry. So now launch.
Do more graph stuff.
Do you
Love on those graphs.
Do you mind demonstrating a little bit of it so I can like video it?
Just like play a game.
Just play a little bit.
Play a little bit.
Yeah.
A moderately difficult one, maybe.
Sure.
Any of them.
Sorry. It's pretty enough like I did.
Oh, hold on. I can actually
Yeah,
move that player.
That's useful.
Oh yeah, players are good.
That's, yeah.
Is this JavaScript or what language is this?
This is C++. It's sort of like a C.
It's easy.
I wasn't quite sure. The stuff is small.
English, yes. Yes, plus plus.
Yes.
Sticking with 4++.
Constellations.
Oh, that'd be cool. That'd be clever.
Got Orion or
Cool.
Ursa.
Good stuff. Thank you.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, guys.
Yeah.
Oh,
Excited to
Would-
watch this.
would
game
that even
today.
simplify the level editor? If instead of if like the level editor was just making that graph, and then it populated the level.
Well, so
That's probably
the
dumb.
graph could represent multiple actual levels. So
Right.
because
yeah.
you could have anything within the same like view column looks exactly the same on screen, but in 3D space it could be 10 or more.
Sorry, I'm
Just walks away. Yeah, no, it's a great idea. I like it. So I'll think about how to incorporate some of that.
Since I'm new, I didn't catch y'all's names.
And Drew?
Drew, hi.
I'm Miles.
Yeah.
You guys have a name for your studio?
Triple Fault Games. is the name.
Triple Fault? Is that what you said?
Yep, Triple Fault
Sweet.
Games.
Sweet.
Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Let us all know whenever you need any help with anything.
Put stuff on there.
Oh, yeah.